Sneaky fight coming up this weekend. We have Boston Strong Charles Rosa representing Boca Raton, Florida, and he's taking on...
They love the Wolf Cola down there.
They love the Wolf Cola down there, but he's taking on Justin Jaynes, the guitar hero. And Matt, for Justin Jaynes, his 2020 was like, I don't know, the Superman roller coaster, because it went up really, really fast with a huge win on short notice against Frank Camacho. And then it went down so fast. And now Justin Jaynes is in an odd spot because you look at his overall body of work. He's 16-7. He has plenty of finished wins. He has that great wrestling background in his back pocket. I want to make sure I get it right because I wrote it down. He went to Olivet College for 4 years. Wrestled there. He's a coach at Extreme Couture. And he's the perfect blueprint of a fighter from Extreme Couture. When you think Extreme Couture, you think a guy that can always wrestle, but he works with his hands maybe a little bit more than we like, but when they do, it usually breeds success. I mean, think of a Dan Ige, think of a Boston Solomon, maybe some of those training partners, but for Justin Jaynes...
There's such a big difference between those two fighters.
For Justin Jaynes, when you look at it, his previous 3 fights are all losses. They're all losses by finish. He lost by finish earlier this year to Devontae Smith, where the eye just wasn't doing all that well. And while Devontae Smith didn't get a performance bonus out of that win, well, the last 2 fighters did. You go back to the Gabriel Benitez knee. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody's spine pop out.
It was, oh my God, that's the best way to describe it. Like, it's the most vicious knee to the body you will ever witness in
his fight before that with Gavin Tucker, it was competitive until it ultimately wasn't. So for Justin Jaynes, again, Tucker earned a performance bonus. Benitez earned a performance bonus. For Charles Rosa, Matt, I had it down on my notes. We always used to snicker and go on about Randa Marcos. She has that, back and forth record. It's so tricky. Is there any fighter in the UFC that's ever had a record like that? Yes, since Charles Rosa made his UFC debut. 9 fights in a row that have gone back and forth. He's 4-5, alternating wins and losses the whole time. Now, he lost the last fight, so records would tell you that he's going to win this fight, but I don't know if that's true.
It's definitely a winnable fight, and I can't take that away from it. It's just really weird when you break down a Charles Rosa fight, because you talk about the grappling and the karate when you always bring up Charles Rosa, because those are really the 2 martial arts that he kind of chose to combine for his MMA career. The problem that I have with that is I've seen him get out grappled now in MMA, and that is a little bit concerning. Like, I understand Bryce Mitchell is that guy as a grappler, don't get me wrong, but when you look at Bryce Mitchell's fight against Andre Fili, who's a fighter that we're going to break down later on in the card, he looked human in that fight. Like, yeah, he took down Fili, but after Fili defended some takedown attempts and forced him to become a striker, like, you could see, okay, Bryce Mitchell's not Khabib Nurmagomedov. Like, there are limits to his grappling. With Charles Rosa, though, it seemed like he was drowning that whole entire fight, and against a guy who, he does have wrestling with Bryce Mitchell, and he does have the jiu-jitsu. It is concerning, because I think Charles Rosa can go out there and out-grapple a lot of guys, and I do like his defensive grappling as well, but he's a guy who, we used to always bring this up with Luis Smolka. I know we're going to have to find a new fighter to talk about it with, but he is a guy who is so comfortable in his own guard, and it does concern me. Like, unless you are a Brian Ortega, a Damian Maia, like, one of those 1%ers in the jiu-jitsu world, I really don't think the full guard with a closed guard in the MMA world is the best position. You can't sweep from there. It's not like you're getting back up to your feet. It really primarily is a stalling position, and I know Charles Rosa has good submission wins off his back. He has arm bars. He has triangles. It's just, when you do give up rounds off of your back and you're not constantly going for the submission, I do get worried. He's a guy who can be held down and then he'll throw something up. And if he gets it, that's great. But if he doesn't, they'll just kind of get beat up on the ground for a little while longer. Like, he tries to find his opportunities to explode, and it's a smart way to conserve your energy. But my issue with Rosa on the mat is when he does fight guys who are physically stronger than him, at least at 145 pounds, and with Justin Jaynes, and I know you're going to talk about it, how we haven't really seen him, the most grappling side of him in the UFC, but with a guy like Justin Jaynes, who isn't a small lightweight, who's a well-built featherweight, if you will, him moving down to featherweight, I do have concerns about Charles Rosa on the mat, even though I do think that's probably his best path to victory.
And if you look at it for Justin Jaynes, he talked about it with MMA Junkie before his fight against Gavin Tucker, which, again, the story of Justin Jaynes 2020 was, I got to get in there, I got to take the fight. And it was probably the speed dial call from the UFC because he's in Vegas, he's in fight-ready shape. So if you look at it, Camacho fight 155, short turnaround against Tucker, 145, he weighs 156, professional, makes the weight. The next 2 of them are at 55, but again, he just kept fighting and losing and getting finished. And that's the other really weird thing for Justin Jaynes. He's lost 7 fights in his career. He's only lost 3 by finish, and it's his last 3. It's definitely a concerning stat, and again, if you want to play the weird game of, well, Rosa's alternated wins and losses, this is his chance, but the trouble for me when I look at this one, if you look at it for Charles Rosa, there were big periods of inactivity. His 5th to last fight was against Shane Burgos. He loses by finish just over 4 years ago. And then his next fight's a year and 7 months ago against the Bermudish Triangle, where he gets down and then he gets him into the weirdest submission. Like, he kind of pulls him in, and Manny Bermudez just decides he forgot how to fight.
He just
and
gave up.
Loses. A guy who couldn't make weight and then couldn't make weight on the
giving up.
regional scene. Was I there for that? You're darn tootin' I was. Then he loses to Michel badly. Then he beats Kevin Aguilar by split decision where, again, Aguilar forgot he was a wrestler and just decided to strike with everybody. And then he ultimately loses last time against Derek Minner. So for Charles Rosa, he struggled lately against some of the bigger wrestler grappler types. Now, for Rosa, I see on the Instagrams the old ATT pictures. Right now, it's more pictures from American Combat Gym. Again, Boca Raton with Charles McCarthy. You know him as Chainsaw Charles McCarthy, whose last fight was a loss to Michael Bisping in 2008. Crazy stuff. But neat for Charles Rosa. And that's kind of a theme on this card. There's a lot of fighters that have either started their own gyms or kind of branched off, and they're at some smaller gyms. Neat to see from Rosa. But when I look at this one, Rosa coming in about a minus 170 favorite. The line hasn't changed since it opened. For Justin Jaynes at about a plus 145. And if we have a look over at the Tapology votes, surprise to us as it is to you, 929 total votes, 85% Rosa, 61% by decision, 30% by submission. For the 15% that have Jaynes, 58% by knockout. Matt, I look at this fight, and I do have a hard time because, again, for Charles Rosa, he's an accredited black belt in jiu-jitsu. He has a very competent stand-up game where he was close in a fight with Kevin Aguilar, ultimately loses a fight with Derek Minner. The trouble at 45 has really been those really wrestle boxer types, and that's who he's fighting. So I know Justin Jaynes lost 3 in a row. He's lost 3 in a row by finish, and I could look like a donkey on Saturday night. But for me, I'm going to go with the Guitar Hero. And honestly, I think that's the first time I've ever picked him to win a fight.
I'm gonna have to side with Craig on this one. Honestly, stylistically, you have to look at the guys who have beaten Jaynes in his last 2 fights. Because Gavin Tucker, yes, he's good on the mat, but he's much more of a wrestler than Charles Rosa is. So he has the opportunity to take down a guy like Justin Jaynes in an MMA fight. Charles Rosa might have an opportunity to drag him down at some point. But to me, it'll be like with a minute left in a round, he's really gonna have to scramble to try to get a submission. For Justin Jaynes, can't get knocked out by a knee to the body from Gabriel Benitez. Can Charles Rosa strike anywhere near the level of power that Gabriel Benitez can?
Be awesome if he could.
It would be. He'd probably be like a champion if he could, but that's the problem. There is a give and take with MMA. And for Charles Rosa, he's got a great gas tank. He's got good volume. He just doesn't have that one-punch power. Same thing with Devontae Smith. Like, he hits really hard, too, and that's what's going to finish you against those guys. So for me, I like Justin Jaynes in this fight. I will say this, though. Charles Rosa, you bring up how he's gone wins, losses in pretty much his whole UFC career. This feels like a must-win for both guys. I do have to say that. Like, Jaynes coming off 3 losses, you can't lose to a guy like that and then still expect to be around and fighting those top contender-ish guys, because it feels like when Charles Rosa gets brought up, people like to bring him up in that, like, 20 to 15, like, 25 to 15 range. He's in the UFC 4 video game. Like, this is what I mean. Charles Rosa, when he gets brought up...
Johnny Eduardo.
I understand, but my whole point was, Charles Rosa was never one before, so the developers need people for Ross thing, throw Eduardo in. You have to remake somebody to put Charles Rosa in the game. Someone went out of their way to do it, is my whole point. It just feels like with Rosa, again, he's got the John Anik connection. I understand it's the Boston thing, but people talk about Charles Rosa like he is a borderline top 15 fighter. He has to prove it at some point, though. Like, you can't lose to Bryce Mitchells and Derek Minners and expect people to keep on talking about your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You have to be able to out-grapple grapplers at a certain point. If he goes out there and does it to Justin Jaynes, that will completely change my opinion on Charles Rosa as the fighter. But no, I have to agree with you for right now. And stylistically, I just think this is a good fight for Jaynes.
Matt, both of us going with the Guitar Hero, Justin Jaynes, to get the win. Love the fight, 'cause it's a sneaky little one, kind of hidden in there in the prelims. Lots of great fights. 2 big heavyweight contenders up at the top going at it. Cyril Gane taking on Alexander Volkov. You're not going to want to miss it, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.